Hi, and welcome everybody to another Facebook Live. And I am excited to have with me some really prominent guests to discuss the topic at hand tonight, which is the power of grassroots. So just a really quick why I'm so interested in this topic is, up until maybe 2015, I always thought politics was something that other people did. And Representative Smith and I go kind of way back to where our kids were little, and she showed me that that is something that I could do as well in ways that were comfortable for me. And that is what I love about this topic, because all of us, a lot of us feel really helpless right now. We feel like there's just a lot that we don't have control over, and it gives us a way to take our power back, to influence elections, influence what's happening in the government, because the government belongs to all of us. So I'm excited tonight. I want to introduce all of our guests. We have Representative Smith here.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here.
And Peggy Ferraro.
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
And Dr. Andre Stoich. So,
Good evening.
So all of our guests have been very active in the grassroots efforts around here and in the politics in different ways. And I think that's what's wonderful about this group together, because we all have some different perspectives. So just a quick housekeeping item is that everybody can enter questions into the chat, and we will try to address them at the end. And I hope that everybody does just talk about how you're interested in getting involved, or your stories about how you've been involved. Let's share and learn from each other. So I'm going to turn it over to Representative Smith.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. And thank you again to Peggy and Dr. Stoich for being here. As Carolyn mentioned, we want to talk about how every single person can make a difference in their own community. And it's more important now than ever. We don't have to feel helpless about the terrible news that we're seeing regarding women's reproductive freedom, regarding the absolutely terrible rash of shootings that we're seeing. What we need to do is get more involved. Change isn't going to happen on its own. And we need every single person, instead of worrying at home, we need to turn our worry into action. Action is really the antidote to a lot of the trouble that we see. And so we want to encourage all of you to get involved with any local effort that supports the change that you want to see. So if you want to see different gun laws, support a candidate who is working to change gun laws. That's one of the reasons I ran for this seat and ran against the person who was holding the seat before me. I saw how that person was voting in favor of weakening our gun laws, and I found it to be completely unacceptable. So the action that I took and that I knew how to take, and the way that I knew how to be valuable, was to beat him. The final straw for me, though, was when that same candidate voted in favor of the 6-week abortion ban that was proposed in Ohio and is now unfortunately law. And it's the same law that they refer to as the heartbeat bill, the people who introduced it. It's the same law that has caused the 10-year-old Ohio girl to have to go to Indiana to terminate a pregnancy as a result of rape. The reason I ran was because many of us who worry about reproductive freedom, we saw these things coming down the pipe. We saw that these things were going to happen if extremist laws continued to be passed in Ohio. And so because I had been involved in other campaigns, because I had volunteered for many, many campaigns starting back in 2004, because I had run for local office and served as a city councilwoman from 2010 to 2014. All these things gave me skills and prepared me to be able to run when the timing was right for state representative, without my knowing that I was preparing for that. And that's why I encourage everyone to participate in your local campaigns. It could be preparing you for a leadership role that you don't even know about in the future. We can all be the change that we want to see. So I want to talk to two people who have really done those things and exemplify really the definition of being a grassroots leader and a local leader, and people who have taken action in their very own communities and neighborhoods. The first person I want to introduce you to is my friend Peggy Ferraro. And Peggy is somebody who lives in my district and has done lots and lots of volunteering and taken leadership roles in politics over the years. But what's so interesting is that Peggy and I didn't meet until she moved into the district where we both live now, and kind of through my activism and running a campaign, I was able to connect with her and find out that she had this huge background of her own experience. And so Peggy, I would just love to hear from you really quickly so that people can think of their own creative ideas for how to get involved and how to fill a need, maybe politically, if there's not something that fits what a person is comfortable doing. Can you talk to me about how and why you started a women's political caucus after your experience of being involved in the 2004 presidential campaign, supporting your preferred candidate, John Kerry?
Thanks. Well, actually, I've been waning in and out of politics for years, doing what I can do. And I started out really being active in local politics in '92. Then I started having some kids. And then I got complacent about politics, and Bush v. Gore happened. And then that's when I decided, okay, my kids were a little bit older and I got right back into politics again. In 2004, I decided on our local county to start to rejuvenate the Women's Caucus. Back then, and even now, but it's not so bad now, but back then, I mean, there was a lot of old boys clubs. There was chairs that didn't really want to listen to us. They didn't try to engage women. So we started our caucus and we got involved with Women for Kerry, and we started hooking up with people in Cleveland for Women for Kerry. And after that happened, we decided that this grassroots effort needed to be all over in 88 counties. We needed to have women's caucuses in 88 counties.
And Peggy, what is it that you wanted to do differently as a volunteer and as an activist that worked better for women volunteers that no one was allowing you to do, or that people were thinking was not effective, that you knew in your heart would work well if you could just run with it?
Well, one of the things was just trying to talk to other women and engaging them to get involved in the process. And that wasn't happening because the precinct people were old people that had been there for years. Nobody was reaching out and getting people involved. And we knew the strength of women was important. So we started these caucuses, and what we actually did was we ended up having a direct line to the Ohio Democratic Party without circumventing the old standard, precinct people. And then we started engaging women and getting them involved and putting them on the ballot for precinct people and getting them involved and just educating them that women can get involved in this process one way or another. You don't have to run. You just support your candidates.
And Peggy, one specific activity that I've often heard and that I've seen is a great starting point for a volunteer who might be a little shy about dipping their toe in the water and definitely doesn't want to necessarily have something that feels like a confrontation or maybe a conversation with a stranger, which is sometimes that's advanced politics. When you start knocking on doors and talking to strangers and engaging them in conversations, maybe you have some literature in your hand that you're going to leave behind for your preferred candidate or your campaign. But one great way that we have found, particularly for many women, to sort of dip their toes in being involved is by writing postcards and giving a handwritten note that says, I support this candidate and I hope you will too, and I'm your neighbor, and you sign your name, and you can do a whole stack of them, and you don't have to go out into a neighborhood that you don't know yet, or interact with someone who you don't know yet. And Peggy, my understanding is that was a specific thing that you and others like you were begging the presidential campaign that you supported and other campaigns to do, and you were sort of being rejected. Is that true?
That's true. We decided we needed to do some type of postcard. So we had to raise our own money. We printed postcards. We got women together. We had postcard parties, and we started that effort. And what we did is we picked women in their locale. We gave women in this township or this location these women, and they wrote personal handwritten letters, and we had fun with it. It was very non-confrontational. If people then often said, well, can we take these home? We'll do more at home. People started doing them at home. And it was so helpful because they weren't these just pre-written stamped emails. They were very, postcards. They were very personal. And yes, we got so much feedback I mean, and we had such success with that, but still we had to still fight. They still wanted to do these pre-printed postcards. And,
These
it was
were
like they,
impersonal things.
right.
Things where you could do more and maybe touch more people, but you were really insisting that this is a way to engage people at the grassroots level, which I think is really valuable, because then that helps people to just be more knowledgeable about the campaign. When you're directly involved, it helps you to be able to be more prepared to talk to your neighbors about who the candidate is and why you've spent some time supporting that person. I think all of that kind of very local engagement is really important to the power of the campaign and making the campaign credible. And so I just want to say that I appreciate you so much for just making sure you just worked around the obstacles, you raised your own money, you believed that what you had to offer was valuable, and you just did it. And it's to this day, that is a tactic that a lot of us use in local campaigns. That's very helpful and is really appreciated by many voters who get a handwritten note in the mail.
And I just want to mention one other thing that we really felt worked was we would have events, we would sponsor events, and we would try to get in, we would get in local candidates, but we would sponsor these events and we would encourage women to come. And then when they started talking to other women, and then their confidence improved. And then they started saying, okay, we'll work at the headquarters. We'll stuff bags for literature. We'll stuff envelopes, and then, but just maybe getting people to come to and getting up that courage to go to that event, and then starting to talk to like-minded people really, I think, helped. And we created those events in those places for women to congregate. They were for all Democrats, but we really encouraged women.
It's so powerful, and you didn't ask for permission or wait for permission or accept no for an answer. And you can do events that are friendly and welcoming and casual and low pressure, and you can have wine or you can have coffee, and you can make it a really fun social time. And volunteers are greatly needed by every campaign, and anyone can walk into any campaign and offer just a little bit of time, and it makes a huge difference. So Peggy, that is an awesome example. And Andre, I wanted to kind of jump over to you and talk about something that we were talking about just before the Zoom started, which is that I believe that one of the most valuable aspects of having local neighbors involved and engaged in a campaign is that helps them to be really knowledgeable about what the real issues are. And then it helps to fight disinformation when the other side really tries to start just throwing crazy ideas into the conversation. And I think that when you don't have neighbors directly involved, then they're not as prepared to fight off that disinformation. And I wondered, since you were part of that election cycle last year, where I believe that disinformation was really a deliberate strategy coming from people outside of our state, outside of our community, but then handing information to folks who might have been a little bit vulnerable and to being misinformed, and then really using those people, unfortunately, to create some discord and some noise in the community. I just wonder if any of this resonates with you, and if you felt that having local neighbors involved was helpful in fighting that off, and how that helped you to get elected.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that that was probably one of the more key things. And I think that's, the message with what Peggy said and with what you're saying really resonates. When even before I really kind of thought about running for school board, I'll give you a little bit of background, because I had actually applied to fill a vacant seat on the school board about a year earlier, because my wife and my friends said, well, you're a doctor, it's COVID, they could use some expertise. And, I always joke, because I always say I hold a grudge against them, but Dr. Scott Schultz, who also retained his seat in the same election, got appointed. So, and I kind of was like, well, I threw my hat in the ring, and, I did that, and I still had my other stuff with my career and everything else. And, to your point, is that kind of went under the radar. And then, as things started to evolve, and I think that's correct, is you started to see this kind of national disinformation that was coming into these local communities, putting pressure and kind of, attacking or assaulting kind of local school districts. with a lot of misinformation about what was going on in terms of curriculum, in terms of social emotional learning, other aspects of the curriculum that are so critical for our kids to learn. You know, there was suddenly an urgency that developed. And it wasn't even, I will take no credit for it. I was not the person who instigated. I was not the person who started it. It was other neighbors and other friends who said, hey, we're hearing this rumbling that, there's going to be groups that are going to try to do the same thing in Bay Village. And it was a group of parents who got together collectively and said, well, how do we respond to this? So you had the motivation, you had the urgency develop, and then it was a matter of saying, okay, what part can we do? And it started off in a small way, in a very organic way, which was just simply to say, okay, what are the key things we need to do? And we felt what was important was not really kind of going out and trying to fight and counter with attacks as much as it was at first, is just saying, look, let's have an affirmative message about what's going on. Let's stand up for our district. We know we have a great school district. We know we have great educators. We know that this stuff is not happening. So part of it was just people saying, okay, I'll be present at the school board meetings. We're gonna show that there is a majority of people who support you, because they were, the same things that were happening on videos on social media were happening in Bay Village, large crowds, very contentious type of situation. And so just that affirmation was important to the board. But then it was also getting people to say, okay, let's talk about things, and let's talk about and really kind of counter this unfortunate misinformation with the reality, connecting people to the educators. The majority of our educators live in Bay Village. Their kids grow up here. It's hard to dehumanize, if you will, or villainize people who are your friends, whose kids play sports with you, who do things like that. And so that's how it started. And then we knew that, there were some board members who were going to step down. And then it kind of became, again, I give credit to my wife and my friends, said, yeah, you should run again. We really need somebody to do it. So that really initiated it. And as the campaign evolved, and again, there are a lot of, very smart people behind the scenes, people who work with you, including Misty and other people who give some guidance about what to do. But I think that was the message, was one was going ahead and telling people, look, to Peggy's point, do what you can, find what you feel comfortable with. Not everybody's great about going door to door, but people put signs up. They go ahead and, we said, look, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, just talk to your friends, text them, talk to them on the phone, talk to your neighbor. And as they got the information, that was the counterpoint. And even when you saw attempts through either mailings or social media posts, there was just kind of an organic countering to that became very strong as people knew the issues. And they said, look, what you're saying is kind of bunk. This is not happening in our schools. They're not financially mismanaged. Critical race theory, this, boogeyman that they created is not happening in our districts. Our kids are getting great experience. And it even got to the point where students came up into the board meetings and started talking about how their education was. And there's no amount of money you can pay for people like students to go ahead and say, you know what, we're okay. We like our education, do things like that. It completely starts to counter that. And so I think that, to your point, that's exactly the type of thing. And so once we got people mobilized in those different ways, we were able to generate engagement. We were able to generate support and do that. And even people who found themselves who didn't think that they would do it. I had some people who would go door to door and they're like, I don't really want to get into conflict. They started to really like it. And then I had people who were doing block after area. And it was like, so I think that really kind of does it. And I think that's the key thing is, and what's happened with it, I think, and what we want to try to do is not only get to the election, but to sustain that. I think that's the other part of this, is because it doesn't just end with a victory. Then you actually have to go ahead and continue to advocate for those things. And those same folks have to sit there and continue to support and continue to push to go ahead and say, look, we want to be true to our values. We want to truly do this. And that's sometimes the tough part, is creating that sustainability.
I think everything you said is so true and so important, and that ongoing, that bigger picture value of having people engaged is what we should all be working toward. This isn't about one campaign or one candidate. I mean, none of us individually makes that much of a difference. But if we can bring in people and get them engaged, and we can make them feel that it is not intimidating to be engaged, and that they can take ownership of their own local government, local school board decisions, they can be part of the conversation and not allow people to shut us down and make us give up because they've overheated the conversation so much that it scares all of us away. That is not that's what the bad guys want. They want us to be scared off.
I completely agree. I mean, I think that, and I think most people, I think for a long time, most people have felt, I've kind of thought about this, and I talk about this with my wife and friends all the time, is I think that people have been content with the idea that there's a certain stability that's been created by the institutions and by policies and precedent and all these things that, everybody always said, even people who voted not the way I would vote or things like that, say, well, nothing really bad's going to happen. Nothing's really going to change that much. They're all the same, things like that. And I think one thing is that the unfortunate, outcomes of that are playing out, and, really shows that it can change. And the second thing is that if you look at the progress of how it is, and this is better than anybody, is that this has really started at the local level. Right. You can trace it from local communities to state house to creating those changes, and that has created the engine that you've seen changes at the federal level. So there's no time like the present to really go ahead and say, yes, this is really matters. And in one way or another, you have to find a way to get in the game and sustain in the game is my advice.
That's right. And going back to what you were saying earlier, there are so many ways to do it. We need people to be engaged. We cannot let people give in to despair and complacency when things seem really, really bad. Use that worry to fuel yourself to just do one more thing, one extra thing. If you're a regular voter, that is the perfect start. That's not enough though. If you can then go from being a regular voter to being someone who volunteers for a campaign shift, whether it's stuffing some envelopes, passing out yard signs, putting a sign in your own yard, take another baby step past what you already do to engage in democracy.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be scary at first, but it's been exciting to see an evolution for a number of people that I know, especially since that 2016 presidential election that was really pivotal for so many people. Some people started out just learning how to get more involved and do some volunteering. And now some of those people, as you've mentioned, Andre, are campaign managers, have become candidates themselves, are leading, local activism groups that are both fun, but they also get stuff done. So everyone needs to just remember that each of us owns our government. Each of us can make a difference. And whether it's even a small donation, or sometimes people donate actual postage stamps that we can then use for a postcard party. A roll of postage stamps is a valuable donation. Anything we can do, anytime you can give is valuable. It makes a huge difference, and it addresses the problems that worry us. So thank you both for being part of that. You inspire me every time I see, people getting involved. Both of you have amazing careers, and you have plenty to keep yourselves busy, but you are taking these extra steps to do even more than the minimum. And I'm really grateful for it. And I think that it can be a model for a lot of us to follow and find different ways to participate. So with that,
you've done a pretty good job too.
Thank you. That
being the person who really is running for re-election in Ohio 16. Yeah. I will point that out. You got the receipts to prove it. So all right.
I appreciate you very, very much. And I always say, by the way, Andre, that I by no means defeated the incumbent who was voting for the things that I didn't agree with. I by no means defeated that person myself. It was 100% because we had so many volunteers, and I'll always be grateful for that. So I wanted to, I want to spread. I want us to do it just all over the state. I just want us to get everybody involved and,
Right.
defeat the people who are voting in ways that we don't agree with.
And that's what we need to do. We need to have like an 88 county strategy in Grassroots. And
yeah,
I
and we
just
can
wanted
start
to-
it ourselves, right, Peggy? If nobody's doing it for us, we'll just
That's
do
right.
it.
You start it yourself. I traveled all over the state, meeting people, trying to get women's caucuses started. But one thing I wanted to mention that I think is important is about activism is even if you don't, even the smallest thing of talking to your neighbor about Monique or about the local candidates and about the local races, that is so important. And sometimes that's hard to do because you're afraid to do, you don't know what, you don't want to bring it up. You don't want to be confrontational, but do it. And I moved into a brand new neighborhood after 50 years. So it was during the election. I really scoped out who had what yard signs. I knew the right people to go to go talk to, and then to find out about more of the people in the neighborhood. And you just start having those conversations. And we used to say, get 2 people to go vote. That's great. Get 2 people to go vote. Tell 2 people about your local candidates that are important to you. Just bring it up, while they're walking their dog down the street and and they see your sign. All that little bit of connection helps.
And I know you're doing that very actively in your neighborhood, Peggy, and I love it. I love it. Just the idea of reminding people, hey, did you know there's an election on August 2nd in our case? It's an odd, unusual date, for an election. So it's helpful to just say, are you voting on August 2nd? Do you know who to vote for? Do you know where to vote? And I want to say, our schools need this kind of help to pass levies. You can do this for any issue that you care about. Just getting involved and asking folks, hey, do you know about this, that this issue's on the ballot? And I know all about it. If you have any questions, I can tell you all about it. So those are very valuable conversations. So that's why we had this Facebook Live tonight. It's just short and sweet, and hopefully it just gives everyone a boost. I know that when the news is bad, it's easy to sort of be mired in despair. And it was actually, I believe, one of my colleagues in the State House, Representative Casey Weinstein, who said action is the antidote to despair. And I agree with him completely. It has been for me over the years. Whenever I feel like things are not going the way I want them to go, I politically and in the community or with local government, I just get involved, and it makes me feel better. And I invite everybody to join us. We have lots of work that we're doing between now and August 2nd to get through the primary. We have fun and we work hard, and we would love to engage everyone who wants to be a part of this campaign, or we can direct you to another campaign. There are wonderful candidates in Ohio who we need to get elected. We need to get Tim Ryan elected. We need to get Nan Whaley elected for governor. And both of those candidates winning is within reach for them. And so ask us how to get involved with those campaigns if those are what you're most interested in. We'll be happy to direct you. So Carolyn, I hope that this covered a lot of the things that you wanted us to cover. I hope that people are inspired and empowered and understand that every single person can make a difference. And that's kind of what I wanted us to get across tonight.
Yes, we did get one question. I actually got it through Messenger from one of my friends who's watching right now. And she wanted to know, you kind of touched on this just now, for people who live in a really solid blue area. What are their options for helping out like the rest of Ohio? And so you mentioned getting involved with like Tim Ryan's campaign, and we have the Supreme Court justices that are running. But if somebody wants to do more, is there a way for them to adopt a district or just give money to those candidates? What would you suggest?
Absolutely. So don't limit yourself to just the district that you're in. If you feel comfortable that you have good representation and that's not going to change, please adopt a district, adopt a campaign, adopt a candidate, and help them to make change in their district. One of the interesting things about the way the map turned out in Ohio for legislative districts, is that while the map is still very unfair and gerrymandered, there are a number of toss-up districts that are now drawn into it. And so I say we all go out there, we adopt those districts, and we fight for every single one of them, and we make them swing the way that we want them to swing.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. And I think this was a great conversation. I feel really inspired. Going to do some canvassing this weekend, I think. So
Awesome. Thank you for all you do. And Andre and Peggy, thank you both so much.
thank
You're
you.
welcome. My pleasure.
Welcome.
Good luck.
Thank you.